will greatly expand our horizons. That is the work that we think is incumbent on us and indeed needs to be passed on in a powerful way to our kids. I want to start off by acknowledging that this feast that we're having today is in large measure the creative outworking of Angie. Angie,
right there.
Thank you so much. You brought us to a whole new level, and I think that the skills that are part of a deep civilization have been brought here, and thank you. Our stomachs are all feeling a kind of centeredness that is rare around here. To start us off, we've asked dear friend Rhoda Soferman if she would give a blessing and do a little teaching around that, and then we'll move into the program. Rhoda?
I didn't know about the teaching, so I really just wanted a blessing.
Blessing is fine. I didn't either.
Oh, okay. Well, you might, for some of the Christians.
I'll share about the blessings that I brought. Marcia Falk, who is a liturgist, a Jewish liturgist who has reshaped a lot of liturgy through a feminist lens, I brought a reading of hers that I thought was appropriate. Let us acknowledge the source of life, source of all nourishment. May we protect the bountiful earth that may continue to sustain us. And let us seek sustenance for all who dwell in the world. And then Jews say before they eat, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who brings bounty from the earth so that we may enjoy it and create from it. Example, we may all eat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick piece of business. Some people asked for a participant contact list that we could share. Not everybody was able to come last week because of schedules with the snow and so on. So some people have already seen this, but if you haven't, can you just sort of go down, check and make sure we have your contact information correct? If there is yes written in red next to your name, that means we already have a permission form to do videotaping for you. If you're not interested in that, that's fine, but if you could just write your name and then write like no thank you or something so I know you've seen it, that would be great. You can just send those.
What is the no thank you?
If you
No
don't want
about?
to be videotaped, if you don't want to show up on the videotape,
Okay.
then we'll edit you out. So I'd like to introduce Rabbi Jeff Basic right now. We're going to switch up the order of operations a little bit. We have been doing sort of the public health, sort of scientific presentation first at these, and then going into the religious discussion. But we're going to change that around today and do it in reverse. So Rabbi Jeff Basic is going to start us out. To introduce him, he attended and was ordained from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and is now the founding rabbi of Kol Halev, which means Voice of the Heart Synagogue community here in Baltimore. He and his wife Donna have 2 girl daughters. He's also been a member of the Food and Faith Advisory Committee for several years now, instrumental in helping us get this project up and running as well as several other things. So it's been a great pleasure to work with Jeff, and my pleasure to introduce him to you all.
You don't join an advisory committee to advise, you join it to be advised. So that's my experience. I've gotten a lot of advice. Some intellectual warm-up. So I say Leviticus, and what comes to mind? Leviticus, anything that
Holiness
rules.
Code. Holiness Code.
Holiness Code.
Second book.
Pardon me?
Second book.
Second book. What else? Really, what?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifices. What else?
Temple. Boring.
Temple, clearly. Nina, say it loud.
Boring.
Boring. Right, details, sacrifices, temple furniture, all the rest. So I want to disabuse you of that kind of attitude towards Leviticus. And Leviticus is a natural next step for us, following George's presentation last meeting. George left us thinking, at least it lingered in my ears, about small acts and restraints. Remember that refrain? That was such a poetic thing. Poetic language of contemporary agrarian writers. I think he was quoting David Klein of the Amish Perspective. But think about that, small acts and restraints. He was talking about those who really know about skills and wisdom transmitted through generations and care and relationship with the earth and the accumulated small acts and restraints. George was suggesting that we need to bring the religious, theological voice into the conversation about sustainability. Science and industry, technology and intellect cannot be our salvation. I never use the word salvation. It's not an oft-used Jewish term, really, but I wanted to use it here. One could argue that Leviticus, yes, the book of seemingly irrelevant details, is actually the peak of Torah. I've come to appreciate it as the peak of what Torah is all about. I submit that Torah is all about how to live in Kedusha, in holiness. That is, a life shaped by thousands of small acts and restraints and characterized by a certain harmony. Remember, Leviticus has something to say about the stuff of life. Food and clothes, weights and measures, just the real stuff of life. George last time and Chris in our opening meeting both suggested that a break in the God-people-land covenant, a violation of the legacy with which we are entrusted, has something to do with our exile. I'll take this a step further by focusing on Leviticus, where any violation of the integrity of certain categories, leads to the contamination of the abode of God, the temple, the contamination of the community as a whole, and the absence as opposed to the presence or proximity of God or godliness. So here's the thesis, and it is put forth so well by Ellen Davis in her chapter, Wholesome Materiality, great name. Leviticus is about democratized and concretized holiness. Holiness on the ground, as we said, the stuff of ordinary life. It puts forth a vision not of lofty social justice, like the prophets do, but of living a congruent life, a life whereby the integrity of each category, seeds, animals, species, fabric, food, life, death, illness, health, the integrity is guarded and honored and maintained. Only in this way does Leviticus seem to say, with this alignment and conformity to class, can the order of interlocking patterns be sustained. This is a good place, I think, to make the connection with Polyface Farm. So if you haven't read about Polyface Farm, there are a couple chapters back there. Michael Pollan describes the farm as a complicated dance in which each actor has a role. The cattle do what cattle are supposed to do, then birds, the chickens, follow and play their role. The seeds have their role, and the pasture, both literally and as metaphor for society or the world as a whole, is left, that's right, enriched and restored. I particularly like the chapter on the animals that Angela chose for our reading. The farmer lets chickens be chickens, right? I think there's a quote, Polyface honors their inborn chickenness. And in another context, he talks about the pigness of the pig, right? They do what they've evolved to do. It's a harmonious balance. They're allowed to be perfect in their way. Ellen Davis, the author of this, I hope you've read some of this, joins with the late great anthropologist Mary Douglas in suggesting that holiness is more than that which is set aside and made special, which is really the typical etymological understanding of kadosh. Set aside in order to be made special. We're suggesting now, that it has as much to do with purity, with completeness, with perfection. And all of these, you'll notice, are priestly kinds of words, priestly categories, which you'll recognize from, for example, the need for unblemished animals to be sacrificed. Right? Not just any animal, but an unblemished one. Because there's something about purity, completeness, and perfection wrapped up in holiness. The priests often talked about things being tahor or tameh, either clean or unclean, pure or impure, for lack of better words. So we're setting up here this holiness and wholeness kind of paradigm. Holiness and wholeness. The priests are the maintainers of the order. They're the maintainers of the relationship with a blessing and protecting God. They're referred to as krovim, those who bring near. And the verb that they act out is hikriv. Again, same root, about causing to be near. And a sacrifice itself is a korban, same root, about drawing near, about proximity, about invoking the presence of God or godliness. That's the central concept, I think. How close are we to that kind of plane of existence? How much kedusha, holiness, informs our daily lives? We're talking about an immanent God here, not transcendence. My main point is this. We are talking about access to the divine here on earth. That's the point. Access to the divine here on earth. The priests, like the prophets in this case, tell us that human-divine interaction is not limited to revelation at Sinai or to weekly worship or holidays, but is and can be and must be ongoing. And so we arrive at eating. Yay, everybody's favorite activity, right? I want to frame eating as not just the primary mode of interacting with the world. I think the quote that Angela shared from Michael Pollan was, eating is the most intimate engagement with the world, right? But more than that, it's an opportunity, an invitation to work with and be in right relationship with creation. Eating is an opportunity, an invitation to work with and be in right relationship with creation, to live in kedusha, in holiness. Food is a communication system. It's a symbolic force, a communicator of covenant. Eating, we could say further, can be a curriculum. And we'll talk about our breakfast in just a few moments, but think of eating as a curriculum. It says something, it teaches something, it conveys a lot. And most importantly, eating is an opportunity to practice covenantal faithfulness. I'm not the first to say, it was, in fact, the rabbis immediately after the destruction of the temple, that one's table can be an altar. Right? You go to church when you sit down to a meal. Seen in this way, our manner of eating can be either restorative and redemptive or part of the ongoing desolation. Our choice must be mindful eating. Kosher, or kashrut, the term used for a system of Jewish dietary laws, means, you know what it means, right? That which is fit and proper to be eaten. That's what it is, fit and proper. It is one attempt to apply mindfulness or consciousness to our eating. Mary Douglas's theory about kashrut has everything to do with the integrity of categories. Which land animals, which birds, which fish are fit and proper? Those that move through the world in a quintessential way, she answers. That is, they are pure and perfectly true to their kind. No mixtures, no hybrids. By the way, did anyone see Nightline last night? Once in a while, I'm watching the news, I see Nightline. It was about hybrid animals. They've mated tigers and lions for ligers. They've mated camels and llamas for a kama. This is not okay with Leviticus. This is like mixing wool and linen in your clothes, right? The integrity of categories. What are pure and perfectly true to their kind? Fish with fins and scales, for example. Animals with 4 legs and cloven feet, and do not have cloven feet, and chew their cud. Certain birds. I would guess that every culture has its version of what is fit and proper. Our food practices, not just the production but the consumption as well, are meaningful. Yes, they are culturally constructed and bounded, and geography is determinative, but every conscious system carries the idea of harmonious sustainability and the truth about how we are to live as part of a larger order. Food is also a carrier of identity. That's what I meant by culturally constructed and bounded. So think about it. Typically, we might have bagels and muffins, right? That's sort of our way, our style. But this breakfast says something different. Think for a moment about your own favorite foods, smells from a loved one's kitchen, memorable meals. It generates a sense of who you are, where you feel connected and at home, where you belong. Think back. What's on the table and what's not? Remember, acts and restraints. Another word about kashrut. We are in the habit of asking, do you keep kosher? Which is not my favorite question. It assumes that kashrut is, a given system once and for all. My training at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College was all about reframing questions. So the question that I would rather ask is, what is your kashrut? Right? What is the consciousness that you apply to food? What's fit and proper according to you? What's the conscious thinking and mindfulness behind your eating habits? Example. Donna and I took a vacation a few years ago to New Orleans. And it's a fabulous city. But here I was sort of incorporating this rabbi identity, walking around with a kippah on my head, and I could not eat in that city.
Yeah.
It is the most treif, that is, non-allowed city in the world. Po' boys and crawfish and I don't know what. It was hard to eat. According to sort of my version of kashrut. So another example, I'll eat chicken, right? But I want to eat, free-range, non-hormone fed, kind of chicken that are fed something other than a steady diet of corn. Right? That's what I consider fit and proper, right? Right. And I don't eat certain things for conscious reasons. right? I identify with the behavioral norms of my people or whatever it is. There are things I do think are fit and proper and things that I don't. Small acts and restraints. That's going to linger in your head as much as it lingered in mine from George's presentation. Are not necessarily small at all. In fact, the world can be read into small things. Are you all familiar with Clifford Geertz? He was this, anthropologist that wrote this really important book called The Interpretation of Cultures. And in his book, he says, social actions are comments on more than themselves. Small facts speak to large issues, winks to epistemology. So what you just ate is a whole world. For the rest of the morning, I'd like us to wrestle with two main concerns. The first issue extends our consideration of access. I had mentioned that our food habits allow for access to the divine here on earth. Our tables and meals can be ceremonies of covenant renewal, right? Covenant renewal. But we can take a literal view of access, and we should, and our religious inclinations ought to inform our political. So a literal view of access, and that is what Angela and Amanda will present. What if the opportunity for the opportunity isn't there in the first place? Right? That's the issue, I think.
Can you say that again?
What if the opportunity for the opportunity that eating represents isn't there in the first place as a matter of access? Right? That's a political issue, right, as opposed to the religious issue.
Or an economic.
You're right, political, economic. Right. So what does our larger societal consumption patterns tell us? We'll also have time at our tables to talk about the messages that our food rituals convey and what your choices are. If you include blessings and prayers, what do they say about our understanding of ourselves, anthropology, God, theology, and how the world operates, cosmology? Right? That's the lens through which I'm trained to look. What does it say about people, God, and the world? What's the food saying about our values, our ideals, our aspirations, or who we are and who we are not? Our place in the world. So I think that sort of gets us started for the morning. Right. The opportunity to live in Kedusha in just your everyday daily choices and acts and restraints. It's challenging, I think, right? To really read Leviticus and honor it as potentially really the peak of Torah. How to bring Kedusha into daily life. I started out thinking it was really boring. In seminary, class on Leviticus, right? And the professor asked that question before she even opens her own mouth. What do you think of Leviticus? And I opened my mouth and said, oh, it's irrelevant. Right? It turns out, after everybody shared, she says, this is the best book in the Bible. So, I shouldn't have said anything. But she's convinced me that this really is where the rubber hits the road. Right? So let's take a few moments, and I've asked Nina, and hopefully Angie can inform this conversation, about this breakfast. This breakfast is deliberately not bagels and muffins. So, Angie, Nina, what is this breakfast?
You said what I would say. I would turn to Angie to sort of unpack the particulars, because just what I was saying, Leviticus appears to be so boring, and appears to be the least interesting because it looks like it's somebody else's laundry list, it's somebody else's shopping list, somebody else's to-do list from 2,500, 3,000 years ago, and we throw away our own shopping lists, and our own cleaning lists, from last week. So why would we keep something so long ago? But the fact is that, and the other books of the Bible are narrative, they're stories, and we love stories. But the fact is that the stories are there in Leviticus, as you said. They're just there cryptically. And they're there, in a sense, cryptically, so much more engagingly, because there's a mystery and an aspect of discovery that is missing in the stories that are obvious, that are present in stories that are hidden. And so that's why it's really quite wonderful. And even if the details of the stories of Leviticus aren't our details, the fact that we can discover the details of our stories through the details of Leviticus is what makes Leviticus so powerful.
Well said.
That's what it is, a wonderful story. But I'll let
So-
you talk about the particulars.
The answers might not be the same. Our answers today might not be the same as answers 2,500 years ago, but the questions are the same, right?
Okay, well, I wasn't really prepared to.
No, she didn't know she was going to
But
have
that's
I'm sorry.
okay. No, that's fine.
But it is sort of conscious
Why?
eating, right? These are choices that have been made.
This is, when I was asked to sort of come up with some suggestions for this menu, I sort of looked at on a broad range of foods that come from Latin America, because across the region there's a tremendous diversity, of course. There's not one, sort of palette, but, I think most of the foods represent what is sort of culturally common. Things like corn is obviously very, very heavily represented. They're in the tortillas, they're in the tamales, and that's, of course, corn in its sort of purest edible sense, not the way it's been adulterated across, most of the foods that we come across in the supermarket. And so corn and beans and, cheese, sort of basic ingredients that kind of span the region. And I think when I was shopping around for these foods, and even though I am familiar with a lot of them, I didn't actually know where to find some of it in Baltimore, and I had to kind of do my own research. And what struck me as I've been thinking about issues of access and also culture was, sort of the proliferation of shops around Baltimore in certain neighborhoods, especially. That made these foods accessible to the Latino population in Baltimore, and how important that is for those communities to have access to that food. And most of it's pretty reasonably priced and accessible. And so, it was important. It reminded me of the importance of how it is, of what food means to us in our cultures. And the fact that these shops or little restaurants or whatever are what make, or keep the people in Baltimore from Latin America connected to their culture and allow them to continue those traditions in their in their own homes and stay connected to that part of the culture. So I'll just offer that up as a connection to the conversation.
Thank you.
Where did you end up purchasing some of this food?
The common consensus is that tortillas are the best place to buy them is a little tortilla shop on Eastern Avenue called Tortilleria Sinaloa, just east of Broadway. Little tiny shop. You can also go in and buy, a taco already made or a tamale or whatever. But they sell like a kilo of corn tortillas for $2 right off the machine. Great place. The tamales and the pupusas are from a little restaurant called El Salvador on Broadway and Pratt. And some of the other stuff I got in a supermarket, some of the juices, a supermarket up in Cockeysville called La Favorita, which is just a sort of Latin grocery store. Some of the other stuff is just bought in, regular places, the, little shops. There's a number of little shops in Fells Point, but then also up in the Timonium, Cockeysville area, there's a concentration shops as well. I'm happy to write up a list of the places if anyone's interested, and I
send
can
it out.
pass them out. Yeah, great to do that.
Just wanted to add something from my own experience, having lived and worked in Guatemala and corn. The Mayans called themselves the people of corn, and it tied into their creation myth that they actually, human beings, came from corn. And so in the eating of corn, there's this deeper meaning of recreating yourself, your human beings from your earliest origin.
What I'm hearing is that food actually mitigates that sense of disconnect, of exile, of dissonance. So it's really quite the opportunity that's often missed, right? Because we just sit down and eat, or we'll pick up any fast food, or whatever.
One quick
Sure.
comment. Anthropologists say that when we move places, there are two signals, two markers that connect us to our previous identity, our previous community. They're the last ones to change. One is allegiance to our home team. So, it's like you're an Oriole fan, and you move to Boston, you're going to be an Oriole fan, until you get shamed or you're in deep trouble. As I've discovered when I was in college, that was a big problem. But also food. And it does it both on a personal basis, but as Angie was saying, essentially it is the center of physical community, geographic community, of neighborhood. So that, just like congregations serve as the physical center of faith communities, food stores, ethnic food stores literally serve as a geographic center of community. And you go there not just to pick up the food, but you go there also to hear the language, to speak the language of your origin, to meet people who look like you, feel like you, talk like you, have memories like you. So it is in a sense a food store, an ethnic food store is a sanctuary, a central sanctuary to return to. So it's more than just the food itself; it's the experience of foodness, of getting to your people, the geographic center of your people.
Great. So the point is that the religious should inform the political. So that's the next part of the program. Amanda, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So everybody here knows me. This is Amanda down here. And Amanda is my colleague and friend, actually, from the Center for a Livable Future. She's going to be co-presenting with me, talking about a really neat project that she's been working on for a while now, a year, 2 years now, on mapping the food system in Maryland. So I'll let her tell you more about that. But
Mapping the food system
in Maryland. So I'm going to start out by talking about the other side of corn that Angie alluded to, which is industrial corn. And the last 2 sessions, it's come up quite a bit, like what are some of the problems with industrial agriculture in terms of sustainability and public health and so on and so forth. We're going to go into that, but before I did, I wanted to present an alternative definition of what good food is, as distinct from the definition that industrial agriculture tends to promote, which doesn't really talk about the quality of food at all, but rather food as yields, increasing yields, decreasing the cost of production. So like I said, not a lot of talk about quality, not a lot of talk about some of those consequences that we've been hearing about in terms of pollution and so on. So good food, this kind, we think is food that is healthy, it's sustainable, so when we run out of fossil fuels, we'll still be able to do it. It's not going to be polluting the earth so much. It's just for farmers, farm workers, slaughterhouse workers, both socially and economically. It's humane to the animals that we're raising for meat. We let the pigs be the pigs and the chickens be the chickens. And it's affordable for everybody. We want everybody to have the seat at this table that Jeff was talking about. Of course, we all know that this type of food is pretty expensive. that a lot of people can't afford this type of food, right? But we think they should be able to. And so we're going to start by talking about some of the policies at the federal level, which kind of trickle down to create some limitations to the physical food environment for folks. Last time around, I think, Father you brought up, well, there was a conversation about individual actions versus structural changes. We're going to talk about the structural stuff today. Sure, there is an element of individual choice in what people decide to eat and that type of thing. We're not disputing that. Although we can say that it is what people have to choose from can often be decided by structures outside of their control. The policies I'm going to talk about, advertising, there's $11 billion worth of advertising that we're bombarded with every year in the U.S., telling us to eat sodas and fast foods and those types of things. When we're convinced that, yes, soda would taste better than water, and we go and we eat it, we find out that, oh, it actually does taste pretty good. Fat tastes pretty good to humans, sugar tastes pretty good to humans, and that can reinforce us eating that stuff. So there's factors acting on us, all the time to kind of influence what we do. In terms of policy, I wanted to talk first off about the Farm Bill, which really should be called the Food Bill, because it affects so many aspects of our food system in the United States. It comes up for reauthorization every 5 years. It was reauthorized 2 years ago, so it'll be up again in 3 years. And it really does set all sorts of policies, food stamps, you name it. And one of the primary things it does is determine subsidy payments for farmers. So you'll notice on this pyramid that the USDA tells us we should eat a whole lot of fruits and vegetables. But when you look at where they put the money, it actually is quite different. 80% of the subsidies go towards these commodity crops here, not fruits and vegetables. In fact, fruit and vegetable growers don't get subsidies. And not only is that the case, but most farmers don't get subsidies at all. It's really the really rich sort of corporate farms who have figured out the loopholes in the law and how to break up their farms on paper and so on in order to get these subsidies. So most farmers aren't getting them. We know that farmers are still losing their land. Their farms are still getting auctioned off. That farm crisis that started in the 70s and 80s is still kind of with us. We have fewer and fewer farmers, and the ones that we have are older and older, which begs I think the average age of a farmer is 56 now, which begs the question for us, who's going to grow our food in 20 years? That's a whole other policy issue. But I sent around, if any of you had a chance to look at it, that share of the retail food dollar that farmers get, and it's going down. The price of wheat that goes into a loaf of bread, the farmer gets back, the money the farmer gets back for that wheat equals about what the package that the bread got put into in terms of expenditures. So what happens when you're a farmer and you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to feed your family, is you do this calculus, right? You say, well, if I grow apples or broccoli, I'm not going to get a guaranteed payment. I'm not going to know what's going to happen. Therefore, I'm going to plow up all of my land and put it all in corn or soy or something like that. This makes sense, of course, economically from that one person's standpoint. The problem is farmer A makes that calculus, and farmer B makes that calculus, and farmer C makes that calculus, and all the farmers make that calculus. And so they all plant corn, and then you end up with an overabundance of corn, deflating the price even further because you have too much. And you end up with these giant piles of corn, and nobody knows what to do with them. Well, we figured out. And you were here for the King Corn showing. If anybody has not seen the movie King Corn and you want to see what an overabundance of corn looks like on the ground, rent that movie. You just see piles and piles and piles of it. The silos can't hold it, And I should say, farmers are kind of victims of this system too. A lot of them don't like it. but, like I said, they're trying to hold on to their land. So a couple of things happen to this corn that we have. I'm going to focus on corn, but it could be soy and stuff too. The first thing is not such a bad thing, right? We give it in the form of food aid to people who are hungry in developing countries. That's, what's that? Feed a man a fish. That's feed the man a fish. That's a Band-Aid, right? Because we're going to have to keep doing that over and over and over again. Happily, I was just giving a talk at the Archdiocese Social Ministry Convocation last weekend with a woman from Catholic Relief Services, and she was telling me that the Catholic Church is really working on looking at agricultural policy, bolstering agricultural development in those places where they're giving food aid. Teach a man how to fish, and then you will have to give them the food. So I think that's a really positive development. But in the meantime, we still have to help feed people, and part of that goes for that. A lot of it gets dumped on developing countries, their markets. We have trade policies which have opened up, our food for export into the developing world. Mexico is a really good case in point, right? So what happens when we have CAFTA is we said, okay, well, you have to take our corn so we can sell it down there. Bring the corn down to Mexico, well, it's artificially cheap, right? Because we, as taxpayers, have subsidized it and reduced the prices of it. Mexican farmers, with their smaller parcels of land and stuff, just can't compete against that. So something like 2 million Mexican farmers have lost their land. And what happens? Well, some of them come north, either legally or illegally, and that's very contentious, of course. They often end up working at, pretty hard jobs. Agricultural work is skilled labor. It's a hard job. It's long hours. It's dangerous. Not a lot of money to be made from that, not a lot of benefits. So that's obviously a justice issue. The other thing that happens is when you have a lot of corn and soy, you figure out how to make it into processed foods. When corn started being overproduced like this sometime in the 70s, 80s, this is all Nixon-related policy changes and so on, but that's when high fructose corn syrup made its appearance. So what you have happened, because again, remember I said we're subsidizing this stuff and making that cheaper than sugar and all, you end up with processed foods being a whole lot less expensive than fruits and vegetables. So we're paying for, we're paying for that to happen. And the sort of practical result of that is that you can buy a lot more calories of junk food than you can of healthy food. Just keep that in mind. I'm going to run through these maps really, really quickly of how obesity has grown in the United States since '85. And I want you to try to pay attention to which states seem to become most obese most quickly, okay? I don't know if you can see that. So the dark blue is 15 to 19% now. That's greater than 20%. Greater than 25%. Now we have greater than 30%. Okay. Colorado's pretty
Great state.
Yeah. So did anybody notice sort of which state in particular?
Mississippi.
Led the way.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
I just wondered if you could do that again.
Sure.
Back it up, start over.
Yeah. I mean, it's really staggering.
Yeah, so somebody said Mississippi, right? So you may know that Mississippi is the poorest state in the country. I just told you that processed food is cheaper, right? So, it's probably not a coincidence that the poorest states in our country are becoming more obese more quickly because they're probably buying cheap processed food. If any of you saw Food Inc. So we had a conversation with the planning group last time after this, like individual choice versus structures and so on and so forth. And do people do the calculus? So when you go to the grocery store and you're poor, do you say, okay, I have $1. That can get me 1,200 calories of chips or 250 calories of carrots. Is it that over? Probably not, right? But sometimes, besides the maybe liking the taste of it once you get started, sometimes it might actually be. When I was thinking through this, I recalled this movie, Food Inc. Has anybody seen that? Mm-hmm. In this movie, there's a family of poor folks. The dad is suffering from diabetes. They're very concerned about his health. They don't have health insurance, and they go to the grocery store, and the kids want pears. And the parents are saying, you know what, those are too expensive. That's going to cost us $1 to get a couple of pears. Whereas I can go to McDonald's and buy you a soft drink, fries, and a hamburger, which is a whole meal, for $1. So in some sense, people actually may be kind of doing that math in their head. Closer to home in Baltimore, in the Southwest neighborhood, we did a community food assessment. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that area, it's pretty low income, predominantly African American. I think the one grocery store there it's closed, right? So I don't think there's any grocery store.
No, there is one.
There is one?
Yeah.
Is it closing?
Food Depot. No, it's still, there were two, and now there's one.
Okay, there were two, and now there's one. We looked at healthy food availability. Now, most of the food outlets in this area are corner stores, right? And within those corner stores, we found that most of them didn't have fruit or vegetables for sale. Why is this an issue, right? People can just go out to the suburbs to get food. And it's true, as you read in the one thing about food deserts that we sent you, that a lot of people have figured out ways to do just that, but it's very time-consuming. It can be an expensive endeavor. I used to take the bus to go grocery shopping, and it was horrible. It was horrible to have to carry groceries. And then I think now about adding my son and his stroller into the mix, and it would be quite difficult. Car ownership rates are probably lower here, right, because it's pretty poor. This is a problem because these are the populations in our country that are at greatest risk for health or diet-related health disparities, for diseases like heart disease, stroke, obesity, and the like. Probably don't have access to really good health care, so are in most need. And I should say that this is an urban example, but these food deserts, these places where people can't access food, are present in both urban and rural areas across the United States. So the very people who most need healthy food can't find it in their neighborhoods. And there is research that shows that if it's close by, you're more likely to eat it, And if they can find it, they may not be able to afford it because of our subsidy system, right? So to just sort of show you what this means in big terms, the health department in Baltimore and the School of Public Health just released some data about life expectancy by neighborhood in Baltimore. And just keep this in mind when Amanda shows you her maps, because the overlap is pretty striking. But here, this area that I'm talking about, Southwest Baltimore, West Baltimore, the life expectancy is 62 to 66 years. Or as you go a little bit north to Roland Park, and it's up to 83 years. It's a 20-year difference with, 2 miles in between the two. Now, of course, not all of that has to do with diet, but some of it does. So that's a pretty striking result of what's going on. Now, Amanda's going to talk about it.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to maybe share from personal experience the validity of the presentation that you did. Nutrition educated at the University of Maryland, and one of the things we do is we go and teach families, low-income families, how to make better and wiser choices with the resources that they have. So we are constantly, always with families that are having to struggle. I happen to work in a region in the Latino American population in Southeast Baltimore. I'm a resident of West Baltimore. I have grown up there most of my life, so all of this is very intimate to me, this knowledge. And yes, they do the calculus. It is a choice every day of whether or not I can afford a pear or a bag of chips. And just on Monday, when I was with the class, that was one of the things that the parents constantly say to us is that we cannot afford to eat healthy. Why do they make it so expensive? And then when we go and explain to them the process, for instance, how you will take a grain in its whole form and then go through the process of turning it into white flour, the connection is not, well, wouldn't it be cheaper if you kept it in its whole form than if you went through all of this process? So there is a conversation going on. There is thinking going on as to why the system is as it is. And they are definitely saying that it's disadvantageous for them and their families. But because their resources are limited, they really, the choices are not there.
I just want to add one little other dimension that sometimes seems to get lost in the access and affordability debate. As we were talking about this market in West Baltimore, there was 2. Safeway closed, it just leaves the Food Depot, and I'm like less than a mile north of that in West Baltimore, and the only food market is the Stop Shop and Save. Well, they have a captured market. Their prices are outrageous, so the little added dimension is there's no competition. So now that it's already expensive, we can charge even more because nobody else has it. And I was looking at last week when you sent out the farm list, and I went to Stop Shop. I don't live in Baltimore, but my church is in West Baltimore, and I have a parsonage next to the church. So when I stay here, sometimes I have to run to the store, and I go to get a block of cheese, a 1-pound block of cheese, generic brand, in Stop Shop and Save, $7. And they have prices in that supermarket that are higher than what the corner store is. I mean, you're just looking at, the kids they're living off of ramen noodles now. And they're, they can go to the corner store and get $3, $4. They're 38 cents a pack in Stop Shop and Save for 1 pack of noodles. And then where I live in Virginia, they're 10 cents a pack. It's incredible. So there's a little added dimension to there not being any competition, that these stores can charge what they want. And it's really devastating to people in the community. We gave a truck, we had a produce truck on last Tuesday, 18-wheeler produce truck come to our neighborhood, and we invite the community to come get it, and then we invite other churches to come get whatever is left. And sometimes we find that the very items that we just gave them, you can walk a block from the church and you see it tossed to the side. Because now they're conditioned not even to eat vegetables because they haven't had them in so long. Well, we have summer camp at our church, and the kids get fruit every day, and we have a share table. Well, guess what's on the share table? Piles of fruit. Because they don't get it, they're not used to having it, and sometimes they don't even know the value of, having an apple a day.
Would you say that the quality of the produce in the neighborhood supermarket, like if you were to go out to Towson, is
It's terrible.
considerably less?
Yes, the quality is way inferior to quality if you go to suburbs. And even if you go, we have a new supermarket in the Mondawmin mall, the Shoppers, where the quality is a little better and the price is a little better, but most of the people can't get to Mondawmin.
We've seemed to have shifted the paradigm of you are what you eat to you eat what you are. And that's kind of pejorative, but it's kind of accurate. And as my brother was pointing out, the competitive sensibilities or the sensibilities of competition not existing, it's like this whole piece is contrived. It's not accidental. And our task seems to be how we can move it. We see it. Now what we're going to do about it. because it's more and more evident. And I mean, everything just falls into the same. Just falls in a way that is creating an imminent implosion, and we have to stop it. We have to do something.
Well, I will say that in terms of doing something, this Farm Bill reauthorization is coming up again, and historically, it was sort of the Midwestern states and the agribusiness folks who were at the table determining farm policy, right? This last round, it was a much broader group of folks. You had the environmental folks, the sustainable agriculture folks, the religious community was more involved, the public health folks, and while we made little steps, right, I think that was sort of the first real go-around with all those new types of stakeholders, and they've been organizing since then, getting ready for this next one. And so I think this round, you'll see more and more, alerts about it, depending on which kind of organizations you're in and so on. I think there'll be a lot more opportunities in this next round to make our voices heard in that sense. Yes, right.
I was struck in your presentation that this is not a new problem. The fact is, we get a lot more press now, but the first time I moved to Baltimore was in 1969. And I lived in West Baltimore, very close to Barnstable Hospital. And the community in which I was living had a practice and a tradition. They had been there forever, had a practice and tradition to buy in the neighborhood. And because I was the youngest member of that community, it fell to me when I moved there to be the one to purchase food. And this is 1969, so this is not a new issue, right? I was stunned. There were two markets that I could walk to. The quality of produce and vegetables in 1969. The quality of we didn't buy it. It turned out to be a huge tension in our community because the option was have no fruits and vegetables or get in the car and drive 6 miles. And so I was just struck with how present this is in our consciousness now, but in fact, my experience here in Baltimore is already, however many years ago, I don't even want to say, but, beginning in 69, that was already an issue. You would never buy a vegetable or a fruit in the supermarket within walking distance of Barnstable Hospital. And so it's just, I just turned and said, this is like triply depressing. Because it's gotten worse, maybe more public, but it seems to have, maybe gotten worse, and that's just stunning to me today.
So we can, if people want to stick around after, we can continue the conversation, but we want to get started with Amanda so that we can still do our faith study. But those are all really good points.
Thank you. And I'll continue to address some of these issues in my talk because what I'm going to present to you is the Maryland Food System Mapping Project that the center has taken up. And part of that project is looking at food access in Baltimore with different indicators. This map here looks at a poverty indicator based on household income using the 2000 census. We just wanted to get, as much as we know from stories and people sharing their experiences that this is in fact an issue in Baltimore, we wanted to kind of catalog it somewhere for research purposes to bring the issue to light even further. So this is one of our first maps, and like I said, it's using the census. The dark purple areas are where 40% or more of the households earn $37,000 or less annually. And that amount is roughly equal to 185% of the federal poverty level, which is, we figured that, well, the level is set too low, and so we're looking at this higher level as a more realistic measure of poverty. And 185% is also the level at which the USDA considers children in those households to qualify for free or reduced lunch at school. And then we overlaid that with the food store categories, and we have the yellow stars are large chain supermarkets, and then the black squares are small groceries. The blue circles are the corner stores, and then the green triangles are convenience stores. And we included this small groceries category because they're smaller than chain markets, but they're bigger in size physically than the corner stores, and we see them as potential intervention sites where they could actually, hold a case for produce and refrigerate some foods. But what becomes, at first glance, we felt like it appears that Baltimore does have a relatively evenly distributed amount of supermarkets. But when you look at the type of supermarkets, if they're the Stop Shop and Save or the Food Depot, that changes the picture a bit. And we'd like to incorporate that in further maps. But what really stands out to me is the predominance of corner stores within these areas of low-income areas. And so it's the total food access, I think, that we need to, or food environment that we need to take into consideration, because these stores are getting in the way of people's attempts to buy healthy food. It's easier to go to the corner store and get something to, feed you. And I also want to bring up, I don't know if you all had a chance to read the article on food deserts from the USDA, but they introduced this term food swamp instead of food desert. And I think it's a useful term because it gets at the fact that there's unhealthy food that's more prevalent than healthy food. So you're kind of drowned in this unhealthy options. And I just want to mention that we would like to map restaurants, but we're not there yet. And now this map, it said that supermarkets are not the only factor in the food environment. They are the agreed upon indicator of a food desert. There's no set definition, but typically a food desert is somewhere where there are healthy food options, especially found at supermarkets, are not within a reasonable walking distance. And there are studies that look at rural areas, as Angela mentioned, but in urban areas we consider a reasonable distance a quarter mile or less to account for having to carry groceries. And also this distance, a quarter of a mile, is in the urban planning field the agreed upon distance people are willing to walk for public transportation. We feel that it's more accurate. I know in the article they looked at a whole 1 mile. We feel a quarter mile or less is more accurate. And I'm putting these two maps together because this one is also using another poverty indicator from the census, but it's just 125% of the poverty level, so just above. And I put them next to each other to point out that, this one is our attempt to do food deserts. And so it's the combined areas of where the supermarket is a quarter mile or less, and there are areas of extreme poverty. And I'm putting them together to point out that it's almost identical. Actually, here I wanted to just mention, and we've already talked about this, I'm going to go fast over it, but the center conducted that community food assessment in Southwest Baltimore, and they revealed that when they have money and can get a ride or afford gas, they will go outside of their community because they know that their supermarkets don't have good quality compared to other ones. And so the experience of food deserts was confirmed by our on-the-ground research through that assessment. And now this one, since I've talked about traditional food stores, I just want to show these next two maps on produce markets and farmers markets and community gardens. And I've included all produce markets, including the covered markets like Lexington and Cross Street. Those don't really have a lot of fresh produce anymore, but in their heyday they did have a lot of fresh vendors. And we've included them partly to point out their location, but that they could be places where we could maybe get more fresh vendors in there. And the other actual outdoor farmers markets are labeled green or blue, and blue is where they accept the WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program checks. And I did this, unfortunately on paper they feel that this program is underutilized. And it's unfortunate, that situation, because if you look at it, partly it's just poorly planned. the markets that do accept these checks are not in the areas of need. And also, if those markets are open maybe during weekdays and business hours, maybe they're not on a bus route. If they are open on the weekends, the bus doesn't run there. So there's planning issues involved that make this program look underutilized. In addition, the value of the checks, it ranges by state, and I wasn't able to confirm Maryland's value, but it must be between $10 or $30 per year. So even when you get a check, even if it's $30, is it worth your while to go out of your way to get there and buy a one-time amount of produce? So there's some issues with this program. I would think it's a wonderful program, but now they're looking at using EBT cards or electric benefit transfer cards at farmers markets, and they're putting the food stamp benefits on these cards. There's potentially less stigma because it looks like a debit card. But they're a little bit difficult to use at markets, but there are efforts underway to put these in all markets in the city and make it more accessible. And then I just wanted to show you community gardens, because it's kind of a positive spin on taking control of your own food environment. But we collected, this list is from last summer, and we have 92 gardens, which include individual gardens, the city farm gardens that are managed by Parks and Recreation, and then those that are overseen by Parks People Foundation and Baltimore City Extension. Last year we had about 63, and this past year, 2008 we had 63, and then 2009 there were 92. So there's definitely a growth and interest in, and it's hard to catalog all these. I'm pretty sure I'm missing a good number. But it's exciting that we're trying to track them and show the growth. And then we've also included urban farms that took hold in 2009. The one I know the most about is Real Food Farm up here in Clifton Park. And I don't know if you all are familiar with this project, but it's over the next 5 years, they want to put in 20 100-foot hoop houses and grow food year-round to sell to the community and nearby grocery stores and restaurants. And the current business plan is kind of a 50-50 plan where half their produce will be sold at affordable prices through a farmer's market and mobile push cart to the community, and then the other half will be sold at higher prices to grocery stores and restaurants, high-end restaurants. And they feel that this is a necessary business model for them because they can't cover their costs to sell the food at affordable prices. But they're committed to helping this community. And this wraps up. Just want to quickly show you, this is a close-up of Clifton Park. And I chose this because we know Real Food Farm is there. And this, again, is this extreme poverty indicator. But once we look at 185%, you can see that almost the entire area is a very struggling low-income area. And the majority of the children in those households are eligible for free or reduced lunch at school. And I say eligible, not necessarily receiving it, because there's some disparity between whether or not they're used. But we can really look at the two grocery stores are the Save-A-Lot and Food Depot. They are lower quality stores that have high prices and low quality food. And so it's kind of heartening to think that Real Food Farm is coming in as an alternative. And I just want to say that we do need to work on federal policies, absolutely. But there are ways that we can take control of our own community by maybe community gardens and urban agriculture, which is taking hold in Baltimore finally. It's very exciting. And just changing the store environment is going to be a long haul. All policy change is incremental. It takes a long time, maybe 20 years, even with people fully engaged and working hard. So in the meantime, we need to do some things to change the environment ourselves. Thank you. Good job.
Amanda, can I ask you a question with regard to, you mentioned Real Food Farms, and I was thinking of the Great Kids Farm and the City Schools connection. Have you done any research into the number of schools that have what I'm going to call edible schoolyards?
Well, that's something I've been working on, cataloging a list of those farms. But Jill Wrigley's here, and she actually works with Great Kids Farm, so I don't know if she can speak to if you know how many gardens there are at schools within the
I don't know the number, but I can say that there's an enormous lot of activity, an increase in activity in developing edible gardens in schools. We just had a teacher training this weekend at Great Kids Farm, and we had 75 people come. But there is some, I don't know if you, I know UMBC is actually also running a project where they're going to be identifying schoolyard gardens. And does the mapping project classify community gardens, school-based community gardens?
Not currently, but I know that through Parks and People, they have this new network, the Community Greening Resource Network, CGreen, and they are keeping track of where there are school gardens that are producing food. There are many that are kind of flower gardens, but also, what is the Maryland Ag Research or Education? Yes, NATE. They also have been working with individual schools over the years, and so I'm going to try to, again, like I did with my community garden list, pull from multiple sources and try to get a list of
there are collected lists of different, I should say, different organizations.
Yeah.
My thought was that if young people become educated to fruits and vegetables because they're growing them themselves, then they may create a demand, and the things won't be unfamiliar.
Right. That's the idea. There are a lot of people working to make that happen.
Has anyone done any research on the ways that some of our, for lack of a better term, junk food is marketed with all of the science of taste, the stuff that's highly salted, very sugary, high fat, gives you a taste explosion, and it's almost addictive. So I know even in my adult children and son-in-law, they're supposed to know all this stuff, and oftentimes they will grab for that taste explosion food. And it feels like in the industrialized food sector, that's almost part of the business model, to create this addiction to
There's a
that
chemical
taste.
response to fats and sugars. And I will say that we know that that's a concern, but I also just want to share Tony Gerasi's experience, the new food services director, not so new right now, at the Baltimore City Public Schools, when he brought in peaches and talks about when kids taste a locally grown, ripe, just picked peach, it is a taste explosion in their mouth. And I think if we can show, create experiences for people where they understand that, some, old carrot at the grocery store isn't going to afford you that experience, but maybe something locally grown or that you grew yourself will, we can kind of re-imprint our chemical reactions a little bit.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there's an excellent book that's the synthesis of all that research, and it's mostly behavioral and cognitive research, but it's called The End of Overeating by David Kessler. He's a former Surgeon General, and it's very easy read. It's for lay people essentially, so you'll get through it in a couple of hours, but it does talk exactly about the science behind how they create food addictions with those foods, and it's just to brilliant, exactly what you said, that's exactly what he covers, is how, why is it that we respond this way.
We're going to move on to the faith piece now. We want to make sure we have this larger discussion. So save your questions for after, okay, when we report out for the large group. So Jeff's going to...
So we don't have a lot of time left, but we wanted to give you the opportunity in small groups to reflect on your own eating practices and choices and share around your tables what they say, what your eating choices say about who you are and who you are not, and why you make certain choices. If there are blessings before or after the meals, and what does that say about our mindful eating? And if there's any incongruity going on between our intention as we sit down and say a blessing, and yet we are participating in rupture, in brokenness, and not to put too fine a point on it, we're participating in sin. So it's really just scratching the surface. On your name tags, you have a number, which is supposed to be the table at which you are sitting. So let's do this. Let's do 10 or 15 minutes at your table. So if you would please share with the rest of us something from your tables. What's come up?
I'll share. Frustration. Frustration.
Say more.
How do you inspire change and how you really make people raise awareness in a very practical way? I'm not sure I can say that more eloquently, but frustration.
I think the other thing that was striking as we were talking was an even more profound awareness of the interconnectedness of, is something profound, everything. No, but it isn't just a matter of, Bill was also mentioning, it isn't just a matter of trying to fix this here. Fixing this here has threads that get pulled in every direction. So while the focus is on this can't, on its own, change, even with goodwill and resources, without a whole lot of other things going on. And it's that sense of, not just the systemic issues, but that sense of there is no way to do this without doing everything. And I think that I need to find a way around that thinking, or else that's going to immobilize, right? So I think for me, that's we were talking earlier, we spend 10% of our income on food, right? Other countries spend 40, 50, 30, 60. What are the implications of our only spending 10%? Well, we have a whole lot more to spend on other things. But that also drives up, right? We want food to be cheap because we don't want to spend more, because we want to spend it on whatever else we spend it on. And all those other things we spend it on are intimately connected to our economy. So it just is, it's worse than I thought.
It can be overwhelming, for sure.
But thank you for that.
But you certainly have a table to put food on. You certainly have children to raise, right? So there are really daily choices. And I know what you mean about the paralysis of overwhelm. That's true. That's completely true. What came up at your table?
And please help me out here. I think we had some of the similar themes of frustration. If I heard it right from people at the table, it had a lot to do with the schedules in our day-to-day lives, and how how many of us were raised to have a daily dinner with our families. Oftentimes that's not kept now, and has to do with schedules and priorities and that sort of thing. I also heard two other themes. I also want to add delight to it, because I've actually been really blessed to have access to really healthy food. And so I run around the Baltimore area hunting and gathering from people that I've formed relationships with. And I would say to anybody who is new to this that it's really fun, to shop from people that you actually know and have relationships with, and it adds so much richness to day-to-day life. I've done this for about 10 years, and it's a real anchor for me. But then also, Reverend Derek and I were sharing about some of the issues that we have as a culture, and personally, I'll speak for myself. In addition to doing all this local food gathering, I'm also a Weight Watchers member because I eat too much. And that's such a common thing here. And I thought Angela did a great job of talking about all the temptations that we have all around us. You go to an airport and you smell the Cinnabon
waft of, really wonderful smells, and you want a Cinnabon, like, God, I want a Cinnabon. And, it's just such a metaphor for what we want. Yeah.
Just don't carry a lot of money.
Anyway, so that's the dichotomy, sort of delight and horror at the same time.
What came up back then?
I got appointed to speak for this table. So, and of course we talked about trying to go green and going green in terms of things we eat, but then we got into the spiritual social side of it, which I think is what you meant. And I referred to the fact that when we have a dinner, of course there's always grapes, but there's also candles. And when our family gathers together, extended family, which is either 12 or 18, depending on whether the ones in the continent of India are over here or not, and discussion and sharing goes on. And for instance, one meal we had right after Obama was inaugurated, the question was asked, was Rick Warren going into the Lord's Prayer a good or a bad idea? And that discussion that dinner went for, just the discussion part, it came up at the end of dinner for 2 hours and 20 minutes. And only the 10-year-old moved from the table. Everybody else was there and shared. So what I'm getting around to is, while that was the longest one, they look forward to it, and it's important, and it's a sharing, and it's a social, and it's a spiritual event, the whole meal. And to me, that's a great opportunity and a memorable experience.
And we also recognize that when you have a meal in that context, you tend to eat your food in a better way. Because we really never address that. Just because you sit down to a good meal doesn't mean that you're eating it properly. If you're gouging yourself, or you're not chewing it, you're swallowing it, you're drinking a lot of it, it gives you an opportunity to really let your food digest, and the whole 9 yards.
And one night we had Father All, he was there for dinner, and he got into it with us very well.
And your table? What came up at your table?
I'll just talk about the grace part.
Yeah.
Help me out. I was sharing that my mother-in-law has a grace that she taught. I'm not sure if I can remember it word for word. Maybe my husband can help me and I can send it to everybody later. But she says that we should thank God for food and faith. From this stack of evidence, we're doing pretty good. And we don't want to fuss. Help me out, Greg.
Yeah, I shared it back here with with the group because it's a part of the ritual that we have. We thank God for dirty dishes. They have a tale to tell. While others are going hungry, we're doing pretty well. With food and faith and fellowship, we shouldn't want to fuss, because by the stack of evidence, God's been mighty good to us.
And we'll send it to everybody. I don't know where she got that from, but,
I like the dirty dishes.
Yeah. It's a recognition.
I knew I had twisted it up really bad.
We remembered it.
If you hadn't mentioned it, we wouldn't have heard it. Yeah, and I'm glad you were around to help out.
Well, Edie and I were sharing that when we, and I would think, since I live alone, I often am eating meals by myself, and I'm not taking the time to slow down and give thanks or pause before I eat when I eat alone, or if I've rushed, I've had a long day of work and I get home and I just want to eat, and that something about being with other people encourages that pause and reflection and sharing. Kind of like the world we live in, how do we find time or make time for ourselves to do that?
Roseanne's point about everything connected and the frustration we're talking about, it often strikes me that when I travel in Europe, in most European cities, most people could walk from where they live to do their daily shopping, because all the food's not in big supermarkets in the suburbs, and they still have the bakery shop, the butcher, the fresh produce. They could literally eat fresh food every day. But here, we've created a world around the automobile where everything has gone out of the city. So how do you talk about food? To talk about food, we're talking about it, you're really talking about almost restructuring our cities, how we live in it. I mean, you can't, because of that kind of immense interconnected problem.
What came up here?
You know, I was thinking, actually not so much when we were talking, we didn't do the assignment, we got off on another time. But,
Shade on you.
Yeah, exactly. True confessions. But I think the answer to the frustration is small things that we can do and let them grow.
Yeah.
It's the parable of the sower. But that first seed will die, but it's going to help fertilize the soil. Its organic residue will help fertilize the soil. And so I think there's a good precedent for thinking that way, thinking small, and not letting ourselves be paralyzed by thinking too big. See the big, but do the small.
Small acts and restraints.
Yep.
And one or two last comments, and then we've kept you longer than we should anyway.
As someone who shops at regular grocery stores, I would like to say that if you're looking for something and they don't have it because you want something in particular, if you ask the produce manager, sometimes they'll get it for you.
Sure they will.
You know, and not only will they get it for you, but then other people buy it, and then it's there most of the time. So there are lots of times. I live in a borderline area of Prince George's County, and the grocery stores are not great, but they really want to give people what they want to buy.
And the last word goes to Chris.
No, it shouldn't be the last word. This is just a factum that I heard yesterday, that Baltimore is the only major metropolis in the United States that has trash pickup twice a week.
Not anymore.
We don't have
Well, they come through twice. They have recycling, and they have, and well, that strikes me as really quite extraordinary that our city, in terms of establishing its priorities, has invested an enormous hunk of its resources in that domain, but we have one of the worst transportation. I mean, it's not just a matter of not being able to walk the quarter mile. We have a terrible transportation system, and the ability to get around and navigate from one part of it. So our priorities around food, around the systemic entanglement of where our money, where our resources are going, I think really need to be re-examined very carefully, and the conversation around food actually lifts up that much larger complex web in a powerful way.
That is a great last word. Yes. So thank you all for coming this morning and learning and sharing, and just thinking through that lens of covenant renewal. Opportunity for covenant renewal. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Great job.
Mm-hmm.